June 19, 1944. Dawn breaks with an eerie calm over the vast Philippine Sea, its azure waters stretching endlessly toward the Japanese-held Marianas Islands. The air is thick with tension and the metallic scent of warship steel, as 24-year-old Lieutenant Raymond Keller stands on the bridge of the USS KIDD, his eyes scanning the horizon where enemy carriers lurk. His heart pounds in his chest, each beat a reminder of the immense responsibility weighing on his shoulders. This Fletcher-class destroyer, bristling with 5-inch guns and torpedoes, has been assigned the critical task of protecting the American escort carriers supplying air support for the Saipan invasion. But what no one in the 21st Destroyer Squadron yet realizes is that one man's defiance of standard operating procedure in the coming hours will preserve America's striking power and enable the sinking of the Japanese carrier that once helped bomb Pearl Harbor. "Maintain position, Lieutenant," Commander Harry Moore orders calmly from behind him, seemingly untroubled by intelligence reports of Japanese carriers closing in. "Keep us 3,000 yards off the starboard quarter of the Fanshawe Bay." "Aye, sir," Keller responds, his eyes never leaving the horizon. In the pre-dawn briefing, Admiral Raymond Spruance's instructions had been explicit. Destroyers were to maintain tight protective screens around the escort carriers, never deviating more than 4,000 yards, regardless of circumstance. Standing orders were to prioritize carrier protection above all else, even downed pilots. Yet, as the brilliant Pacific sun climbs higher, no one aboard the KIDD realizes that those very orders, the naval doctrine hammered into them through years of training, would soon be challenged by a fateful choice that would ripple across the greatest carrier battle in history. No one in the Pacific Fleet yet knew that one destroyer officer's instinct to break formation would protect not just a single ship, but help preserve American naval dominance in the Pacific for the remainder of the war. The name KIDD carried a significance beyond just naval designation. Named after Rear Admiral Isaac Campbell Kidd, who died on the bridge of the USS Arizona during the Pearl Harbor attack, the destroyer embodied the spirit of vengeance, a floating memorial to the first flag officer killed in World War II. Launched on February 28, 1943, at Federal Shipbuilding and Drydock Company in Kearny, New Jersey, the KIDD had earned a reputation as a maverick from her maiden voyage, when she sailed across New York Harbor flying the Jolly Roger from her foremast, the first American warship to do so in 100 years. Lieutenant Raymond Keller hadn't always seemed destined for naval heroism. Born in a small farming community outside Des Moines, Iowa in 1920, young Ray grew up with dirt under his fingernails and the wide Midwestern sky above him. His father, Joseph Keller, had served briefly in the Great War, but returned to his true calling, working the land his grandfather had homesteaded. Ray's mother, Elizabeth, had been a school teacher before marrying, and she instilled in her son a love of books and an inquiring mind that often put him at odds with more practical farm concerns. "That boy's got his head in the clouds," his father would complain to neighbors when Ray would disappear with a book rather than help with chores. But what Joseph saw as daydreaming was actually a mind hungry for wider horizons than those afforded by Iowa cornfields. When Ray graduated from high school in 1938, he surprised his family by declining to take over a portion of the family farm. Instead, he enrolled at Iowa State University to study engineering. The decision created a rift with his father that would take years to heal. "The land has been good enough for Kellers for 3 generations," his father had argued. "What makes you think you need something more?" Ray couldn't articulate it then, but he sensed a wider world calling. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor during his junior year, that calling crystallized into duty. He left school in January 1942 and enlisted in the Navy, where his academic background quickly channeled him toward officer candidate school. By April 1943, Ensign Raymond Keller was assigned to the newly commissioned USS KIDD as she completed her shakedown cruise off the coast of Maine. Unlike many of his fellow officers who came from Naval Academy backgrounds or coastal communities with maritime traditions, Keller brought a Midwesterner's practical approach to problems. His commanding officer, Commander Alan Roby, quickly noticed Keller's ability to think independently, promoting him to lieutenant junior grade by the time the KIDD headed to the Pacific in August 1943. Keller's first taste of combat came during the Gilbert Islands campaign in November 1943, when the KIDD screened carriers making airstrikes on Tarawa. On November 24th, the destroyer's radar operators detected 15 Japanese bombers heading toward the American fleet. The KIDD's warning allowed the task force to prepare, and her gunners claimed 2 enemy aircraft shot down. For his cool performance under fire, Keller earned the respect of the crew and a promotion to full lieutenant by January 1944. Through the early months of 1944, Keller and the KIDD participated in the Marshall Islands campaign, bombarding Japanese positions on Roy and Wotia. In March and April, they guarded an airstrip under construction at Emerau Island before supporting the landings at Aitape and Hollandia in New Guinea. With each engagement, the ship's crew gained valuable combat experience, evolving from nervous novices to a cohesive fighting unit with over 270 men moving as one lethal organism of steel and firepower. By June 1944, when the KIDD joined the naval forces gathering for the invasion of Saipan in the Marianas, Lieutenant Keller had become Commander Roby's trusted right hand. What neither man knew was that the coming operation would place them at the center of the largest carrier battle in naval history, and that Keller's decision to break with doctrine would save not only lives, but contribute to a victory that would shatter Japanese naval air power forever. Integration into the fleet had not always been smooth for the KIDD and her crew. Many of the men, Keller included, came from non-traditional backgrounds for naval service. The ship's engineering officer, Lieutenant Junior Grade Michael Donahue, had been a steel worker in Pittsburgh before the war. Chief Petty Officer Franklin West, who ran the engine room with ruthless efficiency, had never seen the ocean until boot camp, having spent his entire life in Arizona. Radioman First Class James Hopkins was a former jazz musician from Chicago's South Side. Their diverse backgrounds sometimes put them at odds with the naval establishment, but Commander Roby had a talent for channeling this independence into operational excellence. "We're pirates," he would say during briefings, pointing to the Jolly Roger painted on their forward stack, "but we're America's pirates." The image of the pirate Captain Kidd had been painted with the blessing of Admiral Kidd's widow, who noted that her husband's Naval Academy nickname had been Cap, short for Captain Kidd. By the spring of 1944, the Kidd had established a reputation as a ship that got results, even if her methods occasionally raised eyebrows among the more traditional officers. When the ship received orders to join Task Group 53.3 supporting the Saipan operation, some of the staff officers referred to her as that pirate ship from Destroyer Squadron 21. What these critics missed was that the Kidd's somewhat unorthodox approach masked a deadly efficiency. During the Marshall Islands campaign, she had been the first destroyer to follow minesweepers into the Majuro Lagoon. Off New Guinea, she had daringly closed to within 2,000 yards of Japanese shore batteries to provide precise fire support for advancing Australian troops. By the time the Marianas campaign began, the KIDD had evolved into one of the most battle-hardened destroyers in the fleet. Yet the looming confrontation would test even this experienced crew. Intelligence reports indicated that the Japanese mobile fleet under Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa was steaming toward the Marianas with 9 carriers and a powerful surface escort, intent on defeating the American invasion force in a decisive battle. For Keller and the men of the KIDD, the coming clash would demand more than just courage. It would require the wisdom to know when doctrine must yield to the demands of the moment. As they assumed their screening position around the escort carriers on June 18, 1944, Commander Roby gathered his officers in the wardroom. "Gentlemen," he said, studying the chart on the table, "tomorrow we may face the entire Japanese carrier force. Our job is to protect our flat tops at all costs. Without them, our troops on Saipan will have no air cover." He looked directly at Keller. "Ray, you'll have the morning watch. Keep your eyes sharp and your decisions sharper." None of them could have predicted how prophetic those words would prove to be. The vastness of the Philippine Sea stretched before the American forces like a blue canvas waiting to be painted with the violence of modern naval warfare. Over 700,000 square miles of ocean formed the battleground where the Imperial Japanese Navy hoped to deliver a knockout blow to the American Pacific Fleet. For the strategists in Tokyo, the battle represented their last best hope to halt the American advance across the Pacific. For the Americans, it was another step toward Tokyo and final victory. By June 19, 1944, the enormous American amphibious assault on Saipan was well underway. The Marianas operation, codenamed Forager, involved almost 800 ships and 535,000 men, a massive commitment of resources reflecting the island's strategic importance. From airfields on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, the new B-29 Super Fortress bombers would be able to reach the Japanese home islands. Emperor Hirohito himself had declared that the Marianas must be held at all costs. The Japanese plan, designated Operation A-Go, aimed to lure the American fleet away from the Marianas and into a decisive battle where land-based aircraft could join with carrier planes to overwhelm the Americans. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa commanded a formidable force, 9 aircraft carriers with approximately 430 planes, supported by 5 battleships, 11 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 28 destroyers. Against this, Admiral Raymond Spruance's Fifth Fleet deployed Task Force 58 under Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, comprising 15 aircraft carriers with more than 900 aircraft, 7 battleships, 21 cruisers, and 69 destroyers. Among these was the USS KIDD, assigned to screen the escort carriers that would provide close air support for the troops on Saipan. The battle would unfold in distinct phases, beginning with the approach and initial airstrikes on June 19th, culminating in the American carrier strikes against the retreating Japanese fleet on June 20th. But the essential character of the battle was determined in those first crucial hours on the morning of June 19th. For Admiral Spruance, the operations commander, the primary mission remained the protection of the amphibious forces off Saipan. While aggressive carrier commanders like Mitcher favored steaming west to intercept and attack the oncoming Japanese fleet, Spruance insisted on a more cautious approach. His orders reflected this priority. Carrier task groups would operate within supporting distance of the beachhead, and destroyer screens would maintain tight formations around their assigned carriers. The Americans enjoyed significant advantages. Their new Hellcat fighters outperformed the Japanese Zero in almost every aspect. American radar allowed them to detect incoming raids at long ranges and vector fighters to intercept. And most critically, American pilot training far exceeded that of their Japanese counterparts, many of whom had received abbreviated training due to mounting losses. But the Japanese held one significant advantage. Their aircraft had greater range. The Nakajima B-6N Jill torpedo bomber could strike from nearly 300 miles away, beyond the effective combat radius of American carrier aircraft. If Ozawa could position his carriers at this extreme range and launch his aircraft, they could potentially strike the American fleet and then land on Guam or other Marianas airfields rather than returning to their carriers. This was the strategic chessboard on which Lieutenant Raymond Keller and the USS KIDD would play their part. As dawn broke on June 19th, Keller stood his morning watch, scanning the eastern horizon with his binoculars. The task group was positioned approximately 120 miles west of Saipan, with the escort carriers preparing to launch their daily support missions for the troops ashore. At precisely 0530 hours, radar operators aboard the fleet's picket destroyers detected the first wave of incoming Japanese aircraft, still over 100 miles distant. The battle that would become known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot was about to begin. The morning of June 19th dawned clear and bright, with scattered clouds providing minimal cover at 15,000 feet. As reports of approaching Japanese aircraft crackled over the tactical radio circuit, tension aboard the KIDD ratcheted higher. General quarters sounded at 05:35, sending men sprinting to battle stations throughout the ship. Lieutenant Keller, having just completed the morning watch, remained on the bridge as Commander Moore took direct control of the ship. Below them, gun crews swung the 5-inch mounts toward the approaching threat, while 20 and 40 millimeter anti-aircraft gunners tensed at their weapons. "Stand by to make smoke if ordered," Moore commanded, referring to the chemical smoke generators that could help obscure the valuable carriers from enemy aircraft. The escort carriers they were protecting, Fanshawe Bay, White Plains, Kalinin Bay, and others of Carrier Division 25, began launching every available fighter as combat air patrol. These small carriers, converted from merchant ship hulls, were crucial for providing close air support to troops ashore, but lacked the speed and protection of their larger fleet carrier cousins. At 062, radar operators detected the first wave of Japanese aircraft, estimated at 70 planes, approaching from the west. This was unexpected. The main Japanese carrier force was believed to be to the southwest. These planes had apparently been launched from Japanese bases on Guam. Commander Moore ordered KIDD to tighten her station on the starboard quarter of Fanshawe Bay, maintaining a distance of 3,000 yards as the task group executed a turn to bring their bows into the wind for flight operations. Tension mounted as the minutes ticked by. The first Japanese aircraft appeared as tiny specks on the horizon at 0630, their approach marked by the staccato chatter of the KIDD 20-millimeter guns engaging at extreme range. Fleet Combat Air Patrol intercepted most of this initial wave, but a dozen determined Japanese pilots broke through, focusing their attack on the escort carriers. Lieutenant Keller watched as a Japanese Val dive bomber peeled off and began a steep attack run on the Fanshawe Bay. The carrier's own anti-aircraft batteries opened up, creating a web of tracers across the sky, but the Japanese pilot pressed his attack with suicidal determination. "Commence firing main battery," Moore ordered, and the KDD's 5-inch guns joined the defensive barrage, their shells exploding in black puffs around the diving enemy aircraft. The Val released its bomb at 800 feet, pulling up sharply as anti-aircraft fire converged on it. The bomb missed the carrier by less than 50 yards, sending up a towering column of water that drenched the Fanshawe Bay's flight deck. As the morning progressed, wave after wave of Japanese aircraft appeared, only to be decimated by American fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Aboard the KIDD, gun crews worked with mechanical precision, pausing only to clear jams or reload. By 1,000 hours, the ship's gun barrels glowed red from continuous firing. Reports flowed in from across the fleet. The Japanese were being slaughtered in the air. Commander David McCampbell of the carrier Essex alone shot down 7 enemy planes. The advanced American fighters, combined with effective radar control and the dense anti-aircraft fire, were creating a turkey shoot, as pilots would later describe it. But while American fighters were decimating Japanese aircraft 60 miles out, the real drama for the KIDD was about to unfold much closer. At 10:45 hours, radar detected a lone Japanese aircraft approaching at wave-top height, a common tactic to avoid radar detection. This Kate torpedo bomber had somehow slipped through the combat air patrol and was now making a direct run toward Carrier Division 25. "All engines ahead flank," Commander Moore ordered as the torpedo bomber appeared visually, skimming less than 50 feet above the water and heading directly for the Fanshawe Bay's starboard side, exactly where the KIDD was stationed. Standard doctrine dictated that the destroyer maintain her screening position, providing anti-aircraft fire but not leaving her assigned sector. To abandon station would create a gap in the defensive screen, potentially exposing the carrier to other attackers. Lieutenant Keller, now serving as the ship's tactical action officer, watched the approaching aircraft with growing alarm. From his position on the bridge, he calculated the torpedo bomber's approach and the carrier's maneuver options. The Fanshawe Bay was turning into the wind to recover aircraft, and couldn't maneuver sharply without endangering planes in her landing pattern. "He's going to make it through," Keller said quietly to Commander Moore. "The cap won't reach him in time." Moore nodded grimly. "Maintain station. Direct all available fire on the bandit." But Keller had already run the mental calculations. The Japanese pilot had selected his approach perfectly, using the rising sun and the KIDD's position as cover. If the destroyer remained in her assigned screening position, the torpedo bomber would pass directly overhead, releasing its weapon at the optimal distance from the carrier. Anti-aircraft fire might down the plane, but the torpedo would still be in the water, and the Fanshawe Bay would have minimal time to evade. In that moment, Lieutenant Raymond Keller made a decision that violated every principle of destroyer screen doctrine. Without consulting Commander Moore, he leaned toward the helmsman. "Come left, full rudder, all engines ahead, flank. Intercept course." The helmsman hesitated, looking toward Commander Moore, but Keller's voice carried the unmistakable tone of command. "Now!" The KIDD heeled sharply to port, her engines thundering as she surged forward at 35 knots, directly toward the approaching torpedo bomber. She was abandoning her screening station, the cardinal sin for a destroyer on escort duty. Commander Moore's face registered shock, then understanding. "Belay that order," he began, but then stopped, realizing Keller's intent. Instead he shouted, "All guns, concentrate fire on that Kate." The KIDD's sudden aggressive move caught the Japanese pilot by surprise. Rather than passing safely over a stationary destroyer in screening position, he now faced 800 tons of steel charging directly at him, every gun blazing. His options collapsed to two terrible choices: climb and become an easier target, or maintain course and risk collision. He chose to climb, pulling his aircraft up sharply and into the concentrated fire of the KIDD's forward gun mounts. The Kate shuddered as multiple shells found their mark, then erupted in flames, its torpedo falling harmlessly into the sea well short of any target. The burning aircraft cartwheeled across the sky before plunging into the ocean 2,000 yards from the KIDD's bow. The immediate threat eliminated, Keller became acutely aware of what he had done. He had directly contravened standing orders, abandoning the KIDD's screening station without command authorization. As the destroyer slowed and began to return to position, the bridge fell silent except for the necessary helm commands. Commander Moore's voice, when it finally came, was measured. "Lieutenant Keller, report to my sea cabin immediately." As Keller turned to go, Moore added quietly, "And well done." In the privacy of the small compartment adjacent to the bridge that served as the captain's sea cabin, Moore closed the door and faced his junior officer. "You know you violated standing orders," he said without preamble. "Yes, sir." "You countermanded my direct order to maintain station." "Yes, sir." "And you potentially created a gap in our screen that could have been exploited by other attackers." Keller stood at attention, his face expressionless. "Yes, sir. I accept full responsibility." Moore studied the younger officer for a long moment. "In the next 60 seconds, I'm going to give you the worst reprimand of your career. And then I'm going to recommend you for a Silver Star." Keller blinked, confusion evident on his face. "The reprimand is because you broke the chain of command and violated doctrine," Moore explained. "The Silver Star is because you were absolutely right to do so. That torpedo was meant for Fanshawe Bay, and if we'd maintained station, it would have hit her." He paused. "Sometimes the book doesn't have all the answers, Lieutenant. But officially I can't endorse officers who ignore orders and create their own tactics in the middle of battle." "I understand, sir." "I'm not sure you do," Moore said, his voice softening slightly. "The Navy runs on discipline and chain of command. Without those, we're just armed men on boats. But sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, the situation demands more. The trick is knowing the difference." He handed Keller a mug of coffee. "Now, unofficially, tell me what you saw that I missed." As the morning progressed, the scale of American victory became apparent. By noon, over 200 Japanese aircraft had been shot down, with minimal American losses. The few Japanese planes that had broken through the combat air patrol had been dealt with by ships like the KIDD, whose aggressive anti-aircraft fire had protected the vulnerable escort carriers. Yet the battle was far from over. Throughout the morning, American submarines had been stalking the Japanese carrier groups, seeking opportunities to strike. At 08:10, the submarine USS Albacore had managed to put a torpedo into the Japanese flagship carrier Taiho, damage that would eventually sink the pride of the Japanese fleet due to poor damage control procedures. But the critical action, the one that would link forever with the USS KIDD story, was just unfolding 200 miles southwest of Saipan. The submarine USS Kavala, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Herman Kostler, had been stalking the Japanese carrier Shokaku since early morning. The Shokaku was no ordinary target. She was one of the 6 carriers that had launched the attack on Pearl Harbor, a vessel that had participated in almost every major carrier battle of the Pacific War. At 10:48, Kavala maneuvered into firing position. The Shokaku was recovering aircraft, sailing steadily into the southeast wind, a perfect target. Kostler fired a spread of 6 torpedoes. 3 struck the carrier, causing catastrophic damage. The torpedoes ruptured aviation fuel lines, starting fires that would eventually reach the carrier's bomb magazines. The Shokaku struggled for hours as her crew fought desperately to save their ship. But by mid-afternoon, uncontrollable fires reached the carrier's bomb storage, triggering massive explosions that tore the ship apart. At 15:01, the mighty Shokaku rolled over and sank, taking 887 officers and men and 376 airmen with her, a devastating blow to Japanese naval aviation. This news reached Task Force 58 shortly after 1600 hours, triggering spontaneous cheers across the American fleet. The carrier that had helped launch the Pearl Harbor attack had finally met justice, partly due to the actions of ships like the KIDD, whose protection of the American carriers had allowed the fleet to maintain its striking power throughout the day. As word spread through the fleet of the Shokaku's sinking, Commander Moore called Lieutenant Keller back to the bridge. The destroyer had returned to her screening station, her guns still at ready as reports of scattered Japanese aircraft continued to come in. "The old man of Pearl Harbor can rest a little easier tonight," Moore said quietly, referring to Admiral Kidd, their ship's namesake. "One of the carriers that killed him is on the bottom," Keller nodded, the significance not lost on him. "Good hunting for our submariners." "Good hunting for all of us," Moore corrected. "If we hadn't protected our carriers, the Japanese might have hit them hard enough to force us back. Then Kavala might never have gotten her shot." The tactical radio circuit crackled with new reports. More Japanese aircraft were inbound, likely from the remaining carriers. The KIDD's crew returned to battle stations ready for the next wave. The Great Marianas turkey shoot would continue through the afternoon, culminating in the near-total destruction of Japanese naval air power. By day's end, American fighters and anti-aircraft fire had downed more than 340 Japanese aircraft. The Imperial Japanese Navy had lost 3 carriers, Taiho to the submarine Albacore, Shokaku to Kavala, and later Hio to American aircraft. Most critically, they had lost hundreds of irreplaceable trained pilots. Japan's naval air arm never recovered from the devastation of June 19, 1944. For the men of the KIDD, the day represented both personal and national triumph. Their ship had directly saved at least one escort carrier from torpedo attack through Keller's unconventional action. The fleet they had helped protect had maintained its striking power intact, allowing submarines like Kavala to deliver fatal blows to the Japanese carriers. And perhaps most fitting of all, they had participated in exacting some measure of vengeance for their namesake, the admiral who died at Pearl Harbor. As night fell over the Philippine Sea, the mood aboard the KIDD was one of exhausted satisfaction. The battle would continue the following day, with American aircraft striking the retreating Japanese fleet at extreme range, but the decisive action had already occurred. the Japanese naval air arm had been broken beyond repair. Lieutenant Keller, completing his evening watch, gazed out at the darkening horizon. Somewhere out there, the mighty Shokaku lay on the ocean floor, her flight deck silent, her hangar bays flooded. The torch had been passed to a new generation of naval officers like himself, farm boys and city kids, transformed by war into the warriors who would ultimately bring Japan to surrender. In the hours following the great air battle of June 19th, the USS KIDD remained at general quarters, her crew vigilant for any further Japanese attacks. But as evening approached, it became clear that the devastating American victory had forced Vice Admiral Ozawa to withdraw his remaining carriers. The Japanese mobile fleet had been shattered, their carrier air groups all but annihilated. Commander Moore had been true to his word. A formal reprimand for abandoning station was entered into Keller's service record, accompanied by a recommendation for the Silver Star for decisive action in the face of enemy attack. This contradictory treatment confused higher headquarters, and ultimately Keller received neither official censure nor the Silver Star, but rather a Navy Commendation Medal with Combat V, a compromise that recognized his valor while acknowledging his breach of protocol. For Lieutenant Raymond Keller, the battle's aftermath brought both recognition and introspection. More meaningful to Keller than any medal was the reaction of the Fanshawe Bay's captain, Captain Douglas Johnson. 2 days after the battle, Johnson sent a brief message to Commander Moore. "Please convey my personal thanks to the officer who moved your ship to intercept that torpedo bomber on the morning of June 19th. His action saved my ship and over 800 lives." As the American fleet consolidated its victory, pursuing the retreating Japanese on June 20th with long-range strikes, the significance of the Battle of the Philippine Sea became apparent. American pilots dubbed it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot for the lopsided victory in the air. Japanese naval aviation had lost nearly 400 aircraft and most of its experienced pilots, a blow from which it would never recover. The role of destroyers like the KIDDs in this victory, while less celebrated than the exploits of fighter pilots or submarine commanders, was nonetheless crucial. By maintaining the integrity of the carrier screen and aggressively engaging enemy aircraft, these small boys had preserved American striking power throughout the battle. For the remainder of June, the KIDD continued her screening duties off Saipan, occasionally providing naval gunfire support for troops ashore. By early July, she was reassigned to support the assault on Guam, where she would again distinguish herself in combat operations. Lieutenant Keller's unconventional action during the battle became something of a case study within Destroyer Squadron 21. Commander Moore, despite his official reprimand, made sure that other officers understood the underlying lesson. Doctrine existed to guide decisions, not replace judgment. When the KIDD returned to Pearl Harbor in late August 1944 for repairs and refit, many of her original crew, including Commander Moore, were reassigned. Keller remained aboard as the new executive officer under Commander Harry G. Moore, no relation to his predecessor, continuing to serve with distinction through the Philippines campaign later that year. The immediate consequences of the Battle of the Philippine Sea were strategic and far-reaching. With Japanese carrier air power effectively neutralized, American forces secured Saipan by July 9th, followed by Tinian and Guam. From these islands, the new B-29 Superfortress bombers would eventually launch the devastating air campaign against the Japanese home islands, culminating in the atomic bombings that ended the war. But for the men of the KIDD, the battle's significance was more personal. They had helped avenge their namesake by contributing to the sinking of one of the Pearl Harbor carriers. They had protected their assigned escort carriers, enabling the crucial close air support that American troops on Saipan needed. And they had demonstrated that initiative and judgment sometimes required breaking with established doctrine. After the war, as naval historians analyzed the Battle of the Philippine Sea, most attention focused on the strategic decisions of Admirals Spruance and Mitcher, the lopsided aerial combat, and the submarine attacks that sank the Japanese carriers. The actions of individual destroyers received little mention in official accounts. This changed somewhat in 1963 when retired Rear Admiral Ray Keller published his memoir, Destroyer Duty. In a chapter devoted to the Philippine Sea battle, he described his decision to break formation to intercept the Japanese torpedo bomber, acknowledging the official reprimand while defending the necessity of his action. In that moment, he wrote, I had to choose between adhering to doctrine and protecting the ship we were assigned to defend. The letter of naval regulation would have had me maintain station while firing on the enemy aircraft, but the spirit of our mission, the fundamental reason destroyers screen carriers, demanded that I place the KIDD between that torpedo bomber and its target. Naval tacticians subsequently incorporated Keller's experience into destroyer doctrine, acknowledging that screening ships sometimes needed flexibility to counter specific threats. By the Korean War, destroyer screen protocols explicitly authorized intercepting aircraft deemed to be on direct attack runs against capital ships. For Captain Douglas Johnson of the Fanshawe Bay, Keller's action had more immediate significance. His escort carrier went on to play a crucial role in the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, where she helped turn back a powerful Japanese surface force despite being hopelessly outgunned. Had she been torpedoed during the Philippine Sea battle as intended, she would never have participated in what naval historians call the last stand of the tin can sailors. The USS KIDD herself continued to serve with distinction throughout the remainder of World War II, and earning a total of 8 battle stars for her service. In April 1945, while operating off Okinawa, she was struck by a kamikaze aircraft that killed 38 crewmen and wounded 55 others. Although severely damaged, the KIDD survived and returned to service. After World War II, the KIDD was decommissioned but recalled to active duty during the Korean War, earning an additional 4 battle stars. She was finally decommissioned in 1964 and, unlike most warships of her era, preserved as a memorial. Today, the USS KIDD rests in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, as a museum ship, the only Fletcher-class destroyer maintained in her World War II configuration. Lieutenant Raymond Keller's decision to break formation to intercept that Japanese torpedo bomber represents more than just an isolated act of battlefield initiative. It embodies a fundamental truth about military doctrine, that rules exist to serve objectives, not to replace judgment. His action saved not just a single escort carrier, but contributed to preserving American naval power at a crucial moment in the Pacific War. The Battle of the Philippine Sea marked the effective end of Japanese naval air power. The loss of hundreds of aircraft and irreplaceable trained pilots, combined with the sinking of 3 fleet carriers, including the veteran Shokaku, crippled Japan's ability to challenge American control of the Pacific. The surviving Japanese carriers would appear again at the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, but by then they were reduced to serving as decoys, their depleted air groups unable to mount significant strikes. For the United States, the battle represented the culmination of 2.5 years of painful learning and adaptation since Pearl Harbor. American carrier tactics, fighter aircraft, pilot training, and anti-aircraft defenses had evolved to near perfection. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot demonstrated the complete reversal of fortune since December 7, 1941, when the Shokaku's aircraft had helped devastate the American Pacific Fleet. In the grand historical narrative of World War II, the Battle of the Philippine Sea stands as one of the decisive engagements, the moment when Japanese naval power was broken beyond recovery. And within that narrative, the actions of ships like the USS KIDD remind us that great victories are built not just on strategic brilliance or technological superiority, but on the courage and judgment of individual sailors making critical decisions under fire. Lieutenant Raymond Keller's choice to break formation that June morning represents the human element in warfare the reality that combat rarely conforms neatly to doctrinal expectations. His willingness to risk official censure to protect his charge exemplifies the initiative that American commanders sought to cultivate even within the hierarchical structure of naval operations. In the decades since World War II, naval warfare has transformed dramatically, with missiles replacing torpedoes and drones supplementing manned aircraft. Yet the fundamental tension between adherence to doctrine and battlefield initiative remains. Military academies still study cases like Keller's, asking future officers to consider when rules must be followed and when they must be transcended. The sinking of the Shokaku, one of the Pearl Harbor carriers, by the submarine Kavala during the Battle of the Philippine Sea represents a form of poetic justice in the arc of Pacific War history. That the USS KIDD, named for the first admiral killed at Pearl Harbor, played a role in the battle that avenged that attack adds another layer of historical symmetry. As dawn broke over the Philippine Sea on June 20, 1944, the remnants of the Japanese carrier force were in retreat, their striking power shattered. Aboard the USS KIDD, Lieutenant Ray Keller stood the morning watch again, his eyes scanning an empty horizon. The carrier they had saved, USS Fanshawe Bay, continued launching aircraft to support the troops on Saipan. Commander Moore joined him on the bridge, coffee mug in hand. "Any sign of them returning?" he asked, though both men knew the Japanese had withdrawn beyond range. "No, sir," Keller replied. "I think they have had enough for now." Moore nodded, gazing toward the distant silhouette of the Fanshawe Bay. "You know, when this war is over, no one will remember that you broke formation yesterday. They'll remember that we won, that we sank their carriers, and that we kept pushing toward Tokyo." "That's enough, sir," Keller said quietly. "Is it?" Moore asked. "What made you do it, Lieutenant? What made you countermand my order and break station?" Keller considered the question carefully. "I saw the whole picture, sir, not just our assigned sector, but what that torpedo bomber meant to do. And I realized that sometimes protecting the carrier means more than just staying in our designated box." Moore smiled slightly. "There's the difference between a good officer and a great one." He sipped his coffee. "Don't worry about that reprimand. In the report I'm writing, I'll make it clear that while you technically violated procedure, your action was consistent with our primary mission." As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the KIDD's deck, both men fell silent, contemplating the battle's significance. They couldn't know then how decisive the victory had been, how completely Japanese naval air power had been broken. But they sensed that something fundamental had shifted in the Pacific War. 3 days later, a message arrived from Admiral Spruance's flagship. "To USS KIDD, well done during recent fleet action. Your protection of escort carriers contributed significantly to victory. Offensive spirit exemplifies best traditions of naval service." It wasn't until after the war that Keller learned the full context of this message. Admiral Spruance had been informed of his breach of doctrine, but had personally intervened to ensure that initiative would be praised rather than punished. "We need destroyermen who think," Spruance reportedly said, "not just destroyers that follow." Today, naval historians regard the Battle of the Philippine Sea as one of history's decisive naval engagements, the moment when Japanese naval air power was broken beyond recovery. The KIDD's role in this victory, while just one thread in a complex tapestry, exemplifies the combination of courage, judgment, and initiative that characterized America's successful prosecution of the Pacific War. When we consider how great battles are won, we often focus on strategic decisions, technological advantages, or numerical superiority. But the Battle of the Philippine Sea reminds us that victories also depend on individual moments of clarity and courage, moments when servicemen, like Lieutenant Ray Keller, must decide whether to follow doctrine or follow instinct. In such moments, the difference between defeat and victory can hinge on the willingness to transcend rules in service of their underlying purpose. As we remember the Battle of the Philippine Sea, let us also remember that military success depends not just on plans and equipment, but on the human judgment that animates them. Would you have broken the order or obeyed it? The question remains relevant for military leaders today as doctrine and technology evolve, but the fundamental human element in warfare endures. Perhaps the next time you see a naval destroyer slicing through the waves, you might remember the USS KIDD and the critical moment when breaking formation saved a carrier, preserved American striking power, and contributed to one of history's decisive naval victories. Comment below and share this story so others remember what courage really means.